Okay, great. Hello everybody, my name is Kemal. Welcome to the stream. I'm just seeing some questions already, yeah, we'll get to those for sure. We'll get to how to use the Vault in dev environments, switching over between things. But before I want to talk about myself, like what we're trying to do, why.env, some best practices, and then just like a simple demo, and then we'll go into that. But I'll take questions as we do things. So I do have, if anyone hasn't seen already, there is a link in the description to the live stream, of the live stream to the code, which is the completed code for what we're going to be going over. But yeah, we did it on StackBlitz instead of CodePen, but it's something which is meant to be for your own machine, so you'll see. Okay, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Kemal Ahmed. I am from Toronto, Canada, and I am a JavaScript developer and a full stack developer. Have been in the industry at least 2016, and I'm also the maintainer of one of the .env libraries out there called react-native-dotenv, and yeah, the sole maintainer. And yeah, I'd always get questions there, so I thought it was really important to show some people like what are the best practices and how to use .env properly. Also, I think, well, so I'll actually go into a little story as well. In 2015, I was working on my own startup. I think it was 2016, I don't know. And we were switching over from Bitbucket to GitHub for whatever reason, and we had committed our AWS keys to the code, and I don't know when. Sorry? Everything good? Yeah. Yeah, so I had committed my keys to the code. I don't remember where in the progression, like it wasn't at the last commit, it was somewhere in our history, and we didn't know that when we were switching over. And what happened is that some bots had been crawling our code. We accidentally had it public for about maybe less than 5 minutes, and it was taken, and we didn't know, and somebody used about $5,000 of credits. We did get that money back, but after that experience, it really made me realize how important it is for everybody, whether you're just starting off or you're an experienced developer, on how to use the best practices to make sure that you can protect yourself against these things. Because yeah, it's a security thing, and it's, yeah, there's a whole bunch of reasons which we'll go into. Yeah, so because of that, I wanted to make sure that everybody could be equipped with that knowledge, so that way they don't have that same experience. So yeah, that's why I'm teaching this course. This is going to be like a preview. I'm going to do one of the first lessons for that course, and you can access that course in when it's ready. It'll be in the Discord. And yeah, so what we're going to show today is just a basic Node demo of how environment variables work. So what are environment variables, and how does that relate to app secrets, because that's what the title was. So when you have an app, whether it's a backend app, Node.js, or it's front end, it's a mobile app, you're going to have app secrets. So things like even if it's not a key or password, it could be like the link or URL to a server, and you do not want those to get into the wrong hands, even if they are things that you're okay kind of getting out there, because it's something that it's just more information that people can use. So when you are like, security is really about slowing down the access that people can have to your information. So because there's no preventing people from getting there, it's just kind of a way to slow down. And yeah, it's very important that you make it as hard as possible for people to get that information. The other thing that we're going to talk about is configuration, because that's another feature of this thing called environment variables. And yeah, so things like turning features on and off for certain environments, or like logging. You may want to turn logging on and off. Or the demo today, what we're going to do is turning off something called cross-origin resource sharing. And I'm just going to briefly explain that when we go into it, but it's not that important for the purpose of this. So before I start explaining about environment variables, I'm thinking that like, if you guys have questions, just feel free to ask them in the YouTube chat, and then I will get to them as soon as there's a pause, or if I'm about to answer it, I'll probably just answer it and then ask if there's any if you have any expansion questions on that you just ask that there. So yeah, with that, so what is an environment variable? Environment variable is actually something that is a piece of data that is saved in your operating system. So when you go to the terminal, whether you're on a Windows machine, Linux, Mac OS, and you're opening your terminal, you have a set of environment variables, and those are all available in the terminal or when you do various projects. And this is something which it's like is a common practice to use as a space to keep things, keep data about your project, because it's something that is specific to the instance. So I guess the way to think about your project is not just that it's going to be on your local machine, but that it's eventually going to go onto a server, hopefully. And so for that reason, it's important to think about, like, well, how will that server know what the configuration is going to be? And the easiest way to do that is by setting environment variables. So like, you set the variables of the server at the operating system level, and then those are injected into your application. And yeah, well, I'll just go into how that works. So what we will do for the demo is I'm just going to show a basic Node script, not even a server, because I'm not sure what folks' background is. So like, when you start a Node project, you just do node init, and then we'll just create our index, like an index.js file, and a package.json. Sorry, npm init, and we'll just click yes for all these things. So for this JavaScript script, I'm going to show you how we will inject these environment variables into the script and what is there already. So first of all, the most basic thing that all the JavaScript apps have is an environment variable called node-env. So if you do console.log process.env.node-env, you will print out something called the node environment type. So in this statement, the process.env is the prefix that says where all the environment variables are stored in a specific running instance. And then node-env is like a switcher. So it tells you what type of environment you're running. So like if you have a production environment, a test environment, staging, development, etc. Typically you save the name of that type in your node-env. And I'm going to show you what happens when you run this. Actually, let's just make sure that it's even there. It's not, of course. So we will just add that. It's just going to be easier to do it through the package.json because we're going to add some things to the command. So npm run start, and it says undefined. So the default value of node-env is actually undefined. But the reason why it's important to use this as your switcher is just because it's a standard. So most of the libraries which you interact with on a daily basis, whether it's Babel or Webpack or even things that use those, so React CLI or Express CLI, any of these framework command line interface tools will have this built into it, and the default value will likely be when you're testing, it will likely be development. Sorry. And for running it, it will likely be production. Now you can use any value you want, like literally anything here, but the standard environments are development and production. So keep that in mind. But since we're doing a very, very basic script, we don't have something that's setting a default value for node-env. So in order to set that value, we're going to set it over here in the script. So to do that, all you have to do is in your command, you say node-env equals, let's say development, and you put a space there, and that's it. Now this is how it works best for Unix and Mac OS. I'll say as a disclaimer that each operating system can be a bit different on how this is set. But again, this is just how you do it locally. In an actual server environment, then you would set that in the server keys. Actually, I'll show you that later on, but just for local testing, this is how it runs. So I expected that to fail because this is PowerShell. So PowerShell has a slightly different way of doing this, and the way to do that is like my recommended way to do this. It kind of looks sloppy, but again, this is just for local testing. Is I put a separate script, because if you have a mixed group of people, some people on Mac, some on Windows, then I just put :win, and then I do the PowerShell way, which is set node env equals development and space. I don't know why the space but after and not before, but that's just what works. So we'll run that, and now it says it's not recognized because well, we didn't sorry, I'm messing up. Sometimes it doesn't work. Hold on. This is supposed to work. It always fails when you're in the middle of it, right? Oh, right, of course, we ran the wrong script. So npm run start win. So now that should do that, and it prints development. Okay, sorry about that. So so we have just printing the basic node end. What else can it do? So, well, you don't want to put all of your environment variables in the command line. It gets very tedious. Luckily, most of the CLIs out there let you put a flag like dev equals true or something. You don't have to worry about messing this part up, and that's kind of handled for you. But for just basic environment, or if the CLI does not support it out of the box, you're trying to make it work, then you will have to use it in this way. But for other environment variables, so I'll call those like custom environment variables, the way to inject that into your app is using a library called .env. So I'm going to show you how that works. So it's actually spelled DOTENV because like you can't use a period in a npm library name. So yeah, so that's why we use .env. And what that does is it'll actually get some of the values both from a file as well as other environment variables that are already set in your operating system, or we'll say in your terminal. I did forget to mention one thing. So if you're using .env and you have variables that are in the operating system already, you do not need .env to have them put in here. They will already be accessible from process.env as long as they're in the operating system. But for everything else, it's important to have that. So the way to use .env is through require, because we're just using a regular script. .env, and then we configure that using .config, and that, without any inputs whatsoever, will try to read from a file called .env. Now we don't have one yet, so I'm going to make one, and we'll call it .env, and we'll make an example environment variable. In this case, it could be something like a server URL. So yeah, let's use so the way to use .env files, there's a specific way to use it. First of all, when you save this in VS Code, I notice sometimes it tries to say it as a .txt file, or it adds a file type to it, but this type of file does not have a file type, so you don't put .txt. It's a plain text file, and you can add like linting libraries, but it's not really complicated. Sorry, I don't want to say that. It's not a complex file format, so it's actually quite like forgiving if you make mistakes. And so the way to use it is you put the name of the environment variable. Typically the standard practice is to treat it as a constant, which is uppercase and uppercase, and words separated by underscore. And then to set that value, you say variable equals, and then value, we'll say, example.com, because we're just going to be using the value to print stuff, so it doesn't really matter here. You can use spaces. I recommend against it, but again, it's fairly forgiving. And I guess I won't go too in depth into the format of the file unless someone has specific questions there. But yeah, it treats everything on this end as a string. So when you're assigning things to the variable, yeah, it assumes it's a string. If you do have other types like Boolean values, true, false, or number values, you're gonna have to parse that, and I'll probably go into one example at least on how to do that. But for now, just use server URL, and let's see what that looks like when we print it. Server URL. So this line require.env.configure, .config, automatically brings the value from .env into the project, into the running instance. So let's run that, see what happens. And it prints that value. Okay. Are there any questions so far before I continue? Okay, I will, if you post any, I will get to them as we move forward. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to do before we even show the complexities there is how do I set this config path? Because I know some people like to put it into a folder, So personally, I like it in the head of the folder of the project, in the root, sorry, but some people like to put it in, I don't know, we'll just say, let's just say we have a source folder and we have a config folder and we have .env. We're going to move that to config, and we have our .index.js. We're going to move that to source. So now how do we make sure that config is accessing our .env file? Well, I'll show you. So first of all, we need to change the path. So node src, src source. Let's just make sure that the file is working-ish. It won't find the example.com, but that's okay for now. Okay, undefined, yep. And what we want to do is get access to this config folder. So the way to do that is we'll use some of the one of the variables to config, which is path. So we put in the object that is the first parameter to config, that takes an attribute path, and to set that value we want to say the path of where the .env file is. So best thing to do, use the built-in path node library. So we'll do path, require path, and then we'll do path.join dir name. This is just basically like the name of the file folders up until the root, and then actually up until this file. So we need to actually step up once with dot dot. So that takes us from the source folder to the root folder, and then we can go to config. Lastly, it kind of does want to put the actual name of the file. I haven't tried without that, to be honest, but it's just more stable if you do set the value there. So that now works because we've set the path of where that .env file is. Okay, great. Question, can we pass the values in .env at the command line when we start the node script? Absolutely, you can. So let's make a second one from, we'll say from CLI. So I will say you can set multiple values here. So you can say and set, I'll do it for Windows and Unix, so just so that way you guys can see. But I'm going to run it in Windows because I have the Windows machine here. You still have to do and for Unix. So you would set it from CLI equals. Actually, we'll try. See what happens if we actually set it and then run the value, and then we'll do running two at once. Because I think the purpose is, yeah. So we'll do set from CLI equals test, I guess. So now we have that value set from CLI. We're gonna print from CLI, and when we run this, it should say test. I did something wrong. I know what I did wrong. I forgot the ampersands. And this should run all three. Oh, it says undefined, so I believe that was not set properly. I'm not sure off the top of my head, and I'll have to get back to folks afterwards on that. But if you do that up in the in here, that should do it. So we'll do from CLI equals test. Save that, and run that again. Oops, I did a mistake. So I kind of am separating these out with the ampersands, and it's kind of the same for Unix. So you just do and just as if you're doing multiple multiple commands at once, from CLI equals test. So yeah, you can set them from the command line. I'd recommend just, if you just have a few, then you can do that. But you won't actually always get the chance to do this. So I'm not going to go into how Docker works, but typically when you deploy, it may be started from a Docker script if it is a backend, or if it is a front end, it's going to be like bundled, like zipped into kind of like one section, we'll say, minified file, and put into a folder where that value is kind of locked in. And so you won't always get the opportunity to set the values here in the command line. But yeah, that's how that works. Good question, thank you. Okay, so what I want to show you next is how to kind of interpret these values. So if you have a .env file and you are trying to read in a variable that is of a different type, how do you handle that? So the first thing I will show you is how to use booleans, and the way that we'll do that is using a use CORS flag. So just briefly, what CORS does is cross-origin resource sharing in a backend. It's a security feature that can get really annoying when you're testing locally, because it's a whitelist of the domains that you want, like the front end domains that you want to be able to access a given backend. So when you're testing locally, I guess you could set it to localhost, but if it's different ports, whatever, it gets frustrating, it can get annoying, and there's various settings that are in it that you just want to be able to develop and not deal with it. So typically, when I'm doing backends, I use CORS flag, or I do sometimes toggle this using node-env. So I will actually show you how to do both. So we'll say false for now, and we'll get back to it. Okay, another question before we continue. These variables in .env will still be exposed in the client write. Is there a solution for keys? Very, very good question, Sergio. So if you have a front end, well, we'll talk about both. So just say we're building a server, the keys will only be sent to a front end client if you send it over. So just say we're using an API key for Stripe, which is a payment platform. You do not want to expose that. I'm just going to put random. So if you have a Stripe API key on the back end, you do not want that to be accessed from anyone else other than your developers and your server. So yeah, like this is not, it's it's so to answer your question, is it a solution to keys? Well, people who are using for a server, it definitely is, because like you should be adding your .env file to a git ignore. So I forgot to do that actually. .git, just say we save our .git ignore. And it's in config for some reason. And we should get ignored .env files. And the reason why you get ignored the .env files is because you should be setting it on the, unless it's just config, unless you're just using .env for configuration, like this use CORS flag, like, which is okay to be exposed. You can already set those values wherever you are deploying. I guess we'll go into that later. The second part of that question is, just say this is a front end that we're deploying. So if we are using .env for a front end, anything that you use on the front end will be available, but it's still okay. It's still good practice to use for config files, as well as things that are specific to your application, that it's not bad if it's exposed, but it's not preferable as well. And it makes your life a lot easier, because when you want to move from a dev environment or a beta environment or a local environment, you're not constantly changing these, or even like in your CI, in your continuous integration, like if you are using scripts to automate bundling of like deploying, then you want those scripts to easily be able to configure on the fly as you need to, various configurations or server URLs and things like that. That would be very annoying to go in and manually change all the time. The other thing is, you don't want to be committing these to Git, because it does risk these things getting shared. And also, yeah, like you don't always need to be sharing. Like if you have, maybe for a backend, you may have like multiple API keys. One is for testing, one is for like actual production. You don't want to be giving the production Stripe keys to just anybody or any contractor, or like anybody who's new to the team, or like who you're not sure about trust, or like, yeah. But because you're using git ignore, it should be not in the project. But for front ends, that is inescapable. So very good question, and sorry about the long-winded answer. Okay, so back to the types. We'll start off by toggling what's it called, CORS due to node-env, and then we'll go into how that works. So let's just remove these for now. So we're going to make like a very, very basic fake CORS script. So we'll say if process.env.node-env equals production. Like if we're in a production environment, then we will use CORS, otherwise we won't. So let's do that. Console log We're just going to use console log. We're not actually going to do the real thing. Serve to server. Else console.log serve to all domains. So let's see what happens when we run this. So it says development environment, so serve to all domains. And if we set the value in our package.json to production, then it would say serve to server. And we can give another dimension to that. So if we wanted to only serve to a specific server, like we have our server URL here, so let's use that. We can say serve to server and then we'll say process.end.server URL. And oh yeah, we didn't set it to production, so we'll just add this, we'll add another script for running like a production type environment. When prod, I'm just doing -prod just because it's easier to change the line. And we'll say equals production, remove this extra stuff, and then we'll run that npm run start when prod. And then it says serve to server example.com. Cool. Alright, so as I promised, we're gonna go into types. So just say this is not enough for you, like you don't want to use node-env to do that, which is actually very common. You want to use an actual variable to set that. So the way to do that is, because this is always a string, we have to check for the value. So we can say use cores equals true. But one thing, I do want to note something very specifically now, because I want to remind people that even if you're using a Boolean, there's a few values that are possible for use cores here. So we have true, somebody could set false, and if somebody could not set it, it could be undefined, and it could be something else, because there could be human errors. We'll say, like, floss, someone spells it wrong. So it's important to realize that, because we are doing a string comparison. So make sure that whichever value you are comparing to, that you find it is the default value that you want. So is not the default value. In this case, I want it to be off by default, so I'm just saying else there. You can also be more specific, like you can be a bit more careful with that, and you can say else if this value is true, is false, then you can actually do a little bit of error handling. So we'll put that there, false, and then we'll say console log use cores not set properly. So now that we have the error handling if that's not set properly, and we have both potential values handled, let's try that again. So we have use course is false. We'll see what happens. Let me just run the basic one. So it says development served to all domains. We'll try what happens when we set true. It should say shares to example.com. And when we set this value to, we'll set it to blank and basically undefined, then it should be an error. Or even if we say flash. In fact, even if we use uppercase, it is case sensitive. So be careful there. That's why it says use core is not set properly. Okay, great. So yeah, somebody could actually even capitalize F in false, because like, yeah, some languages do that differently. Anyways, that is that's how to do types, at least Boolean types. Any other questions so far before we continue? I think that somebody wanted to see how to get it from a vault. Are you referring to like a .env vault, which is a library that exists? Like there's a library called .env vault. It's a service. I'll just write it out actually for those who don't know. It's a paid service. It's like AWS, it's a hosted thing. If that's not what you're referring to, that's okay. And I think though that what you want to see is how in a production environment is it referenced. So I will show a demo on how to do that on, haven't decided yet actually, but we'll say like on Netlify, I think. But I won't go too into that demo. I'll just show you how I've used that before. So let me see. I'm just getting an environment ready. So yeah, in the meantime, if there's any other questions, feel free to send them over. Sorry about the delay there. Okay. Just verifying that this works. Okay, I don't have, let's see actually. Yeah, I don't have any environments currently on me, but what I'll do is I'll show you what it looks like anyways. So I have an example website that I made before, and on Netlify, and the way that I would set the environment variables for this is I go to the domain settings, and there's actually a section here in the settings called environment variables, and you can set environment variable values here. So this is a React app, so there's kind of a prefix which is React app _. So just say if we wanted to make a test, it's not going to make any changes because I'm not going to be reading this because I would need to change the code. We'll just say we had test. Yeah. And then we would set the value testing for course for demo. And you create the variable. And that is now available in the app from anybody else who's using it. And this is like, I know this sounds like a very specific thing, but pretty much every service has a section like this. AWS, even like if you're running containers, there's ways to set that value, these values for in GitHub and your CI, like when you're running continuous integration, they all have a spot for you to set that value. So try and find, you're gonna have to either dig into the documentation for that specific platform or ask the support there to find out where you can set these values. And this is the best place to put them over committing them into Git, because it makes it so that otherwise your project is not as configurable, it's not as portable. And if you expose your Git by accident, then those things don't leak. Even if they're not necessarily sensitive, you still don't want them to be out in the open. Okay, I thought you would talk or showcase how to retrieve keys from HashiCorp vaults. I could. I'm gonna look into what a HashiCorp vault is. Sorry about that. I haven't used a HashiCorp vault, and there's a bunch of different vaults out there. I haven't used this one in particular. Let me just put it on the other screen for now, just in case I do the wrong thing. But it's kind of the same strategy for each. Once it's in your project locally, you're going to be setting it on the website itself, wherever that would be. Let me see. I'm taking a look right now. Do you have like an example of what you used HashiCorp for that I could try? I'm just trying to figure out how to use this. Oh yeah, actually I have seen this one before. Okay. I think I know what to do here. I'm just registering. But essentially there is a CLI, and the CLI is connected is how you like kind of inject it into your application. And then there's going to be a way which you have to connect it to your client, like when it's deployed. So let's see, because the tricky thing is getting it. I'll show the dashboard actually, because I don't have anything that I need to hide right now. So HashiCorp, to those who don't know, is, I believe, a way to share environment variables in a team setting. So if you have multiple people on a team, well, how do you share it if you're not sharing it through Git? Well, you can do it through paper, you know, you can do it, you call the person, read it out. You can do it through like a Slack message which you delete, or like something encrypted. But that can get tedious. So some people have created solutions for this. In this example, somebody asked how to use it in this particular solution called Vault. I haven't used Vault before, but essentially it works with your cloud provider to inject that into wherever it's being deployed, so that way you're doing things safely, and they don't. And then there's also a command line interface that comes with it that you know, like when you run in your package JSON, there'll be something like Vault in it. You can make a script, and then you run a command which initializes, and actually, like, you will log in. It'll save a token that's not saved in your Git that fetches and changes the values. And even if you have multiple sets of environments, which I didn't go into, but we will go into that in the course, like having multiple sets of environment variables, the Vault would be able to switch between those. I'm not sure if that answers the question completely, because I didn't do a proper demo there, but essentially the thing that you should know is that if you're using a Vault, that you want to be thinking that with the perspective that your .env file is not going to be put into Git. And what that does, like the mindset is, okay, env is temporary, and so I need to make sure that that is going to be injected through the technologies that Vault provides, and if not, then through these settings. Vault, I think, has like a few. It works with AWS and Azure, so it doesn't work with Netlify. So that is one of the drawbacks of using a Vault for this. I mean, but it's still very, like, it still gets easy to use. I mean, you can always use like Slack to share the environment variables with those you trust, or if you're just using environment variable files for configuration, then it is safe to put it into your Git. Yeah. Any other questions? We are getting to 1 o'clock, but I'm happy to answer any other questions. Okay, I'll just go over a bit about what the course is going to talk about, because we just have a little bit of time. The course will go over how to use environment variables, like multiple sets of environment variables, as well as 3 other types of environments. So deploying to a front-end React, deploying to React Native, as to a back-end server, and how to configure things like your Webpack, your Babel, and various other CLIs in combination with .env. All right. Since I don't see any other questions, just confirming something, but yeah, thank thank you for chiming in, and yeah, I hope that you do partake in the course, and if you do have any questions, that you do join the Discord channel and ask them there, and that I can help you out with anything else there. Thank you so much.